Afternoon.
Hello.
And a sound test. Can you hear me? I have a script, which I'm going to try to use accurately. My name is Wayne Granville. I'm the moderator of the Town of Weston Town Meeting. And it's a delight to see you all here today. I'm going to try to facilitate this session, because I know a lot of people here have questions. We hope that we're going to be getting some of the answers that we need. I want to thank Susanna Keller and James and the team here at the Walker Theater for the work they've done in setting this up. I really appreciate that, and we all do. And thanks to Will Freeman and New Thought Vermont for hosting and really organizing this event. We have three, no, we soon will have three.
He's coming.
He's coming, officials from the state. Doug Farnham will be here soon. He is the state recovery officer. Stephanie Smith is the state hazard mitigation officer. And John Berger Campbell is the regional floodplain manager. And we also have Senator Dick McCormick, and we have Kelly Paola. I messed up your name again, I'm sorry.
I heard about it.
And is Becca White here?
No, she's working.
Good for her.
But you have to.
And I want to, a special thanks to Allison, because she was instrumental in bringing these state folks down here together. Before we start, Allison, do you have a couple of words you want to speak about what we hope to get out of this session?
Oh, it's great to be in a theater with the lights on. I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm also one of your three state senators. It is a joy to be in Weston, although this isn't a particularly joyful occasion. In pulling this together, really inspired in many ways by all of the talks we've had and all the walks we've had and the work since July here in Weston. It became clear that about this time it was good to kind of line up your expectations and our plans and the state's plans and how we're going to finance mitigation. So it's really, I think, a great idea to begin to get an understanding of, and what I hope you'll get from Doug, who's really our czar of recovery, a notion of what the administration's plans are for mitigation. It will be, as you know, a fairly lengthy partnership with the feds and with the Silver Jackets and the Army Corps of Engineers and with our fabulous Agency of Natural Resources. We also have Marie Caduto, our Queen of Rivers, for our neck of the woods, wherever Marie is, there she is. And so it's just, I think, my hope for tonight is that we begin to align our expectations with the reality of what it's going to take to both plan for effective mitigation and how we finance it. And I think that's what I'm hoping for us to begin to get a sense of tonight. So, thank you all for having us.
Thanks, Allison. Doug is late, and we're hopeful that he will have some opening remarks when he gets here. But in the meantime, I think we should take advantage of these wonderful people in a good sense. And where's somebody? Where's Jeff Brown?
Right.
Jeff, you have a question that might sort of set the stage?
All right, yes. Can everyone hear me well?
No.
Yep. All right. Jeff Brown from Weston, part of the Planning Commission here in town, also representing the Vermont Country Store and a flood victim myself, so therefore some personal connections to this. The question I'm going to ask, I want to put a caveat around it, which is not all villages and towns in Vermont are the same relative to their relationship to flooding. And I fully understand that and appreciate that. So knowing that not all villages and towns are the same, my question really is directed at the highest level, which is, has the state or the administration started in a direction relative to whether towns should rebuild in a floodplain or a floodway or not? And the reason why this comes up is I think we're hearing some mixed messages, and the recent article in Vermont Digger by Ben Doyle from Vermont on historic preservation, where he suggests that in fact that discussion is going on, I think for some of us, Weston, London, area other towns, was a bit alarming as we're working diligently to come up with flood resilient plans. So I don't know if this is appropriate for you guys or for your boss, but that really is the fundamental question. Should we rebuild in the floodplains?
You start.
Thank you, Wayne.
Does this come up?
Yeah.
Take this.
It comes off.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. From the administration perspective, when Doug is here, you should re-ask that piece of it because I'm very much at the staff level. But my job is to support communities in making sure you have access to the funding. All of the funding that I manage, none of it is the state coming down telling you what to do. It's the community applying for what they want to do. So it's through a partnership with us, working with the Rivers team, working with my office to access the funding that we have available, but we're not telling you what the solution is necessarily. Well, in any sense, the town gets to decide what you want to move forward with. The thing that I'll talk about is, when we have a federally declared disaster in the state, we get access to a program called the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP. So it's a FEMA-funded program. We get 15% of whatever the total allocation is in public assistance and individual assistance across the state. So it's looking like that round is going to be $75 million, which is huge. So following Irene, we had $34 million. This is going to be probably upwards of $75 million. And one of the first things we did within Vermont Emergency Management following the disaster was put in a scoping study under that pot of funding. So our scoping study is intended to look statewide at some of the most significantly impacted communities. So we're looking at little like bubbles of areas. So Weston, Jamaica, Londonderry is one bubble we're looking at. Ludlow it's in its own bubble, probably. But those are areas where if the communities are interested in working with us, we can have an engineering firm come work with the Regional Planning Commission in your area and help you figure out what options you have. So we did a similar project in Jeffersonville back in 2015, where the engineering firm was able to give them a menu of here are all the things you could do, and here's how much flood reduction you could see in your downtown from those activities. So if you do this large floodplain restoration project, you might see a 4-inch reduction of flood levels in your downtown. If you upsize this culvert or upsize this bridge, you might see a certain amount. And they were able to use that as a way to pick off projects. So through the statewide scoping assessment, which was just awarded by FEMA, we're going to start getting that out early next year to see if you guys do want to participate in that. We're covering the match for it if you do. There's a 25% match for FEMA funding. But we'll be paying that piece and working with you guys. The caveat is you need to be willing to submit a project application under the same funding round. So you don't have to pick off all the things, but you need to at least pick one that we can develop and then submit, because that's the intent of scoping through this hazard mitigation grant program. So right now, we're going to request extensions on the timeline, but we're looking at late next year for having applications ready. But all of that will be done with the Regional Planning Commission, with the towns, to figure out what projects you want to move forward. Nothing will be forced on you in terms of projects.
And so I'll talk so much from a more local perspective. So specifically as it relates to Weston and Londonderry and Ludlow, I think that no one is going to say you should not rebuild. I think the question is how do you do it in a more resilient way?
Oh, there he is.
Welcome, Doug Farnham. John, excuse me, let me just catch Doug up to speed. I've introduced you already, and I wonder if you had some opening remarks from the point of view of the administration. And what Allison Clarkson has said is, in terms of her expectations for this session, is an understanding of what the process is, where we're going, how long it will take, and how we translate the state's policy initiatives into local action. Okay?
Thank you. So, sorry for being late. I had to come from the FEMA headquarters up in Wilson through Montpelier, and then when I got down here, I had trouble finding the building, so just kind of an adventure. So one thing I'd say foundationally is that the governor cares about the local visions for growth and recovery. So that's where we're starting from. We are not going to come in and tell anyone exactly how they need to change their community. That's a starting point. I know there was an article mentioned where it was like, we're gonna kick people out of the downtowns. That's definitely not anywhere on the radar. That's never been discussed by the administration. I don't know how anyone got that impression, because both the governor and I have said in multiple times in press conferences, in media interviews, etc., that we care about the local vision. We want to support that. We want to find resources for it. And I think the one big question is, how do you define local, right? And that's exactly what this meeting is about. Does it stop at the town borders? Does it stop at the watershed level? Does it stop at a certain section of the regional watershed? And I think that's how we're going to have to figure out what groups of communities need to come together and have these conversations. And so we're working with FEMA and the interagency recovery team at the federal level to try to identify additional resources, to get more federal grants, to get more support for our regional and local discussions. And we've got a couple leads on different grants that hopefully I can move the application process forward and secure some resources for us and support for Vermont to have those conversations. There are a lot of formulaic resources that are going to be coming to us through the size of this event. But I think we need additional support from FEMA and from their community assistance section, and from the Economic Development Authority is another good one. Real estate and rural development we're also working with. So one of my main functions is just to go out and hunt for money for Vermont. That's one of the main things I spend my days doing. And arguing for Vermont, trying to work with the federal partners, trying to make them not put us through the ringer on their federal programs, because they're very difficult to participate in, right? So technical assistance to help support communities, particularly smaller communities, have these conversations is one thing I'm continually hunting for, and hopefully we'll be finding more money to bring to the conversations in the spring. I think this town meeting day, this upcoming legislative session in spring, it's a critical juncture for figuring out what direction our communities, our regions want to go in. We don't have to have all the projects locked in, but like Stephanie probably may have already mentioned, I think the 6-month extension may have come up. Like, we are going to have a lot of our hazard mitigation projects identified very rapidly compared to how long it takes to figure these things out. So there is going to be a crunch in the spring to figure out what projects we're going to need to be doing with those hazard mitigation funds. So I think that's the way we're approaching it at the moment. We are developing a strategic plan with our federal partners that we'll be able to share once that's developed. We're hoping to have a version of that ready by the end of the calendar year, and that will be public, and that'll show what we're working on. We've been hammering pretty hard lately that housing is a fundamental problem all across Vermont. And how we address that housing issue varies from community to community, but it has to be resilient, it has to be safe housing, and there's a couple different ways to approach that. One is by reducing the risk to our downtowns, by actions we're taking outside of those downtowns footprints. Others are what we're doing inside the downtowns themselves. It has to be a combination effort. And sorry if I'm going on a little bit too long, but that's the general perspective we're trying to bring. And again, it's going to be driven by the local levels. We are trying to secure those additional resources, but we do have, we did appoint a recovery officer for Central Vermont, and we're pulling on temporary recovery officers for Northern and Southern Vermont as well, so that we have 3 full-time resources kind of devoted to supporting those conversations. In addition to the staff at A&R and BM that have been doing this for the last 12 years, and do it in their day-to-day life and are the true experts on it. So we're really just trying to pull on additional communication resources. Todd, I hope you don't mind if I call you out. Todd Eaton is one of those two interim regional recovery officers, and that's one of the federal grants I'm hunting down is trying to get more funds to hire regional recovery officers. Secretary Flynn was kind enough to lend me Todd's time and expertise. So we are kind of shifting resources around within the state in this initial reaction and setting up our recovery framework, and hopefully we'll be able to secure some federal grants to set up a recovery structure that should last anywhere from 1 to 4 years, depending on the different activities they're engaged in. This is a long haul effort where the first 2 years we have to figure out what we're doing in the first year. We have to get everything really started and executed in the second year, and then a lot of the projects will take another 3 to 8 years. I mean, after Irene, we had just finished out. I signed off on one of the closing documents a couple weeks before the flood in July. So I think there's a lot of good work. I would say that the work that DM and A&R did after Irene really held up well in this event, and it's more just refocusing, reinvesting, the same way we were doing it before, respecting local visions, and guiding some of the regional conversations with technical expertise, but not political bias, right? I don't know how much my intro went into, but I'm former military. I was a military intelligence analyst. I worked at the tax department for over a decade. I tend to be a systems thinker, and I'm not a politician by any stretch of the imagination. I will say things that would get me immediately disbarred from being a politician in the future, because I like to be honest and I like to talk about the issues. And I think that's what we need to do. And I do think we need to evaluate our systems and how we're set up in Vermont and really talk together over the next year or two. So.
Thank you, Doug. I would suggest that one of the issues you're describing is the length of time that you're talking about in terms of recovery assistance and the immediacy of the issues we're facing in Weston in particular, which I'm familiar with. Susanna, did you have some thoughts about that?
I'll grab this one away. I'm Susanna Geller, Executive Artistic Director of Weston Theatre Company, one of the buildings in which you are in right now. So thank you all for being here today. I have a question that is very specific to a town like Weston or Londonderry, Ludlow as well, although really it's what we're facing in a small rural town. It's something I talked about with visitors from the governor's administration back in August. I know it's something that the administration has been dealing with in the aftermath of the ARPA funding and the struggles that small towns have had accessing that funding. The context here is a small town is run by volunteers. A town like Weston, to be honest, when I hear you talk about following the town's lead, hearing from the town about what the town wants, that's a very hard thing for a town like Weston to follow through on, because the people who are doing that work are people who have lives beyond their administrative positions. So I would love to hear what you are expecting, and in as concrete and step-by-step a process as possible, what you are expecting towns to do at this moment, what the state wants from towns, and similarly, what towns should be doing to help a business like Weston Theatre Company, like the Little School, nonprofits and corporations that were seriously impacted by the flood and are dealing with this timeline and not knowing what it is. You can hear in my voice the strain that we are under. So thank you. I'm going to hold on to this so that when others have questions, I can pass it around.
Yeah, I would say on the first front, that that volunteerism driving a lot of the local activities. That's one reason I was very grateful to the legislature last year that they funded the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. We got $3 million of general fund. We've been, I will admit, my rollout of that program was disrupted by the flooding quite a bit. But one side effect of the floods is that Londonderry now qualifies for that Municipal Technical Assistance Program. And what that means is the first stage of that is meant for the smallest of communities, where It's a community needs assessment. Similar to what the Vermont Council on Rural Development does, where they come in and they facilitate and they find out what the community vision is, they work with the local select board, they work with the local town manager or administrator, if there even is one, and they just figure out, okay, what do you want to do? Then the second stage is the federal funding and opportunities assessment, right? So the program is designed to take everyone from a town that knows they want to change or grow or thinks they do, hasn't really had the chance or the professional support to come together and have that conversation. And come together, have that conversation, solidify what are the community's needs. And so that program is a one-time program that we're running right now, and we just are finalizing a grant agreement with Vermont Council on Rural Development to provide additional sessions. The regional planning commissions have received additional support. So if a qualified town approaches a regional planning commission for support, they are contractually obligated to give the town that support on AOA's dime. And so, in my instructions to all of the towns have been, if you approach the Regional Planning Commission, and they don't help you, and they say they don't have time to meet with you, please tell me. And I will address that, because I've been told that they have capacity to support the money that I've signed off for their work. So if they're putting towns off, I really want to know right away. I'm not saying I have reports of that happening. I'm saying if they don't give you the support you need soon, it's supposed to be a rapid program, because we're already halfway through the American Rescue Plan Act. We have the bipartisan infrastructure law coming out. We now have flood damage to recover from. We need the communities to have the support to have the conversations now. So it's not a long-term program.
Sorry, but my understanding is that Weston, Londonderry qualifies for that, and my understanding is that in the kind of scale of qualification, Weston is just outside the cusp.
Weston's in.
Is it a?
Chris Campbell's here.
Yeah, hey Chris.
Great,
Thanks
thank you,
for that.
Chris.
But regions, part of that is that a regional project is definitely allowed. Now, we can coordinate with the RPCs on when a regional project comes up, but we've actually been trying to encourage that. That's actually what the best state is, when multiple towns that are smaller are working together to find an economy of scale. So we pulled on VCRD, we've given the RPCs additional resources, we're pulling on other vendors to supplement the RPC's effort. Any communities that go through the RPCs, that's the preferred path, that's like the easy path. But we also have a path for a direct grant to municipalities, if they've got something, or a group of municipalities that says we want to hire someone. So I'm also pursuing federal funds, 2 or 3 federal funding opportunities that are directly related to basically doing the same thing as the Municipal Technical Assistance Program without using Vermont dollars. So trying to augment that and provide more just technical support, so that we always will need to get the vision from the town, and that can be hard to coordinate, right? But help coordinating that, help starting it. The planning process and that early visioning process is where so many things just fail to start, right? Because people don't have the time or resources to do it. As far as what a small town or a medium-sized town or large town should be doing for their local nonprofits or businesses, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to tell a town what they should or shouldn't be doing for their community. That's a community conversation, and if you feel like your town is not doing enough for your nonprofit or your business, then that should be handled in the elections process. I think that's a local decision. Now, what the state should be doing, I can speak to that a little bit more, right? So we've been working with the Vermont Community Foundation, we've been working with the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund. I think we've been trying to line up and just stay aware of what the philanthropic community has been doing. But we did include nonprofits in the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program, right? So I think that it's a community decision on how to support your local businesses. I personally would encourage a strong level of support, because I think you get a return on investment. But if I start from the foundation of I'm not going to tell locals what they should do, and then I immediately say this is how you should behave, that would be a little 180.
Is Katie Buckley another resource for people who?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So actually, that's a good point as well, because Katie Buckley at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns has been an amazing resource, central resource on federal funding analysis for towns. And as part of municipal technical assistance, we're actually augmenting Katie's shop a little bit to try to pull in and emphasize that. I think Katie's been amazing, and she really does, she's able to essentially answer a lot of those questions that a smaller town might have about federal resources. I recently heard one false narrative about ARPA funds. I just want to make sure it's out there. ARPA local fiscal recovery funds, there are very few prohibitions on how those are applied once they've gone through the revenue replacement treatment. I've heard people say, well, we can't use this for that, we can't use that for that. It really only applies to Burlington. Pretty much every town in Vermont, except for Burlington, is below the revenue replacement threshold. And just for your own sanity, your town should be claiming revenue replacement and then, doing whatever the town decides is the most responsible thing with those funds. But it essentially makes it so that you can spend that money on whatever you would normally in the course of business, with the exception of financing previous debt or paying off like pension funds and things like that. So the Treasury didn't want people to be paying off their old bills with the money, but for operations, buying equipment, local match for federal efforts, hazard mitigation, et cetera, that ARPA local fiscal recovery is a good source. And I know it's per capita, so for small towns, sometimes it's not a lot of money because it was roughly $300 per capita.
Susanna, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think you started to get closer to sort of the second part at the end there, which is less what should towns be telling or doing for their nonprofits, but what is the state looking to towns to do at this moment to support business. And the question here is just, again, we don't have the infrastructure for our town to be contacting businesses about getting in touch with FEMA and things like that. So
Right.
there's a lot of communication disconnect, I think, is what we're coming up against.
Yeah, we definitely saw communication disconnect in the FEMA application process, and with the Small Business Administration, there was some bad information that was sent out there that led to some some nonprofits that would be FEMA eligible ending up missing deadlines. So I think we do have a break in communications even from the state level with our nonprofit community. There's no distribution list that the state has either, and that's one reason some of the nonprofits missed their application deadlines with FEMA. We tried to get information out, encouraging everyone to apply, saying even if you submitted for a small business association loan, make sure you get your request for public assistance in. So I think the best thing that businesses and nonprofits can do right now, continue to advocate with your local legislators, because what we do, so the legislature was great about approving the BGAP program. That $20 million is a lot of money to move on short notice, right? Now, the question of whether or not the state needs to provide more support will come up for the General Assembly to consider. And I think the administration, through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, is, considering what, if any, additional resources we might have to put towards business or nonprofit assistance. I would say, I think it's been publicly messaged at this point, it's going to be a tough budget year at the state. So the question will be how much money actually exists for the state to move around and for the legislature to approve. But I do know the BGAP program funded about 10 to 15% of the losses that businesses experience, and businesses / nonprofits of the total applicant pool. So the gap that our business and nonprofit community has, even after that $20 million went out, is still quite massive. So I don't think we have our arms wrapped around exactly what we're going to do with that, but we know the gap is still quite large. It's a similar size gap to what individuals that were flood impacted are feeling. All BGAP really did was bring businesses about on par with individuals, because 24 million of individual assistance went out from FEMA, and Vermont sent out $20 million of its own assistance, which I would say did not happen after Irene, so it was a pretty large step. But I will acknowledge that 80 to 90% of the gap still exists.
May I just, oh, thanks.
So, Doug, all three of you. It's just so great to have the three of you here. We're very lucky. Just on budgeting. So for those of you, we start with the administration's proposal on budgeting. So we begin with the governor's proposal and the legislature is sort of reactive and then builds a budget, but reacts to and we start with what the governor presents. So Doug has just talked about business support. I would love to ask you and have you share as much as you're able what the mitigation financing is going to be. What are you planning and thinking about in terms of, yes, we've talked about the technical assistance resources, and I'm hoping you're going to recommend that we continue to finance that. Well, otherwise we have to put it in. But I think that the big question here is we align our expectations with planning and the time frame it's going to take to mitigate some of the challenges we face with our rivers and for all the hazards. But I would love to know, and maybe you're not able to do this yet, what you're planning in terms of putting towards that continued work mitigating the challenges.
So, Stephanie, please correct me if I get any of these numbers wrong. But right now, our estimated damage for the total flood event statewide with public assistance is like $570 million. The feds pay 90% of that after we cross the obligation threshold. It hasn't formally happened yet, but it's going to happen at some point. So there's been no official change from the 75% rate, but we're planning for the 90% rate at this point. So that brings us down to like $513 million of what the FEMA is going to pay for direct damage from the flood. And that's estimates. This is all early. We could argue with FEMA. Some things can be disqualified. Some damage could be added or adjusted down the road. And then the feds take 15% of that, and that becomes hazard mitigation funding, which generally speaking has a 75% match rate, right? So that's, over 77 million, and I think that's what we learned recently as well, is that we're getting another 40 million in a different program specific to buyouts. So we were thinking a month or two ago that we were gonna have to use a lot of that 77 million, that 70 plus million for buyouts, and some of it for floodplain projects, some of it for more complicated hazard mitigation projects. So now most of one thing that having FEMA in-house is helpful with is, FEMA can put more pressure on other federal agencies than the state of Vermont does, being one of the smallest states in the country. But FEMA has powers because of the disaster. And one of the things is, and hopefully I'm not being too aggressive in pushing anyone under the bus here, but Army Corps of Engineers solutions don't tend to be the solutions that we prefer in Vermont. So,
some of them observe us in good sense.
Some, yes. Sometimes our priorities line up in certain circumstances. When we're talking about watershed management, less so. So one thing FEMA has been doing is saying, Vermont's the customer here. please come forward with solutions that make sense in the context of Vermont. So I think that will help us quite a bit if we can get the Army Corps' expertise directed in a fashion that makes sense for Vermont as opposed to larger structures that we're just not going to do.
Doug, you can help me out for a second. I'm trying to quantify things, going from these gross dollar numbers and trying to get more sense out of them. You mentioned $40 million for buyouts. Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
So tell me how many projects that is, or how many people are going to get bought out with $40 million?
Yeah, so it's, the short answer is it depends. That could be like 100 properties.
100 properties?
Sorry, it depends, but that could be in the range of 100 properties.
In the state?
Yes, and it's actually, so it's a new FEMA program that just came out maybe 3 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, called Flood Mitigation Swift Current. And the federal obligation across the country was $300 million. It's specifically for states that have open disasters that have significant impact, like we did in July. And so Vermont is eligible for $40 million of that national $300 million. And it's buyouts, it's also elevations, and mitigation reconstruction projects, which is fixing and elevating at the same time for properties that were damaged. So there's some specific caveats about who's eligible under that program. So we'll have to sort out what goes there versus what goes to that hazard mitigation grant program, 75-ish million that I talked about earlier. So we'll be trying to figure that out on our end to help towns decide or understand where projects need to go.
Chris, did you have a comment?
You're on. I'm on. Okay. Stephanie, I know after Irene, so Chris Campion, Executive Director, Winter Regional Commission. I know after Irene, I think with that round of hazard mitigation grant money is like 11, 15, 20 rounds that we went through because towns didn't have the data, the information to be able to create a successful application. Can you tell the folk here, from what you know now, what's going to be required to create a successful application? And also, I just want to, Alyssa Sabeto is on our staff. She's our senior planner, who's our lead on emergency planning. She helps towns develop their hazard mitigation grants. We've already been in conversations with Weston and Londonderry and Marie Caduto and others about the river corridor plans and dams and those kinds of things. There's already some conversations going, but what can you share with towns about what they're going to need to be able to pull together for a successful application?
Yeah, I'll start with the timeline here, which is, bear with me for a minute, it's a little bit nebulous. So when we have a federally declared disaster in the state, we get 1 year from the date of the disaster declaration to submit projects under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which would be July 14th of 2024. It's easy for me to ask for two 90-day extensions. That puts us in January 25. So what I'm working with as a tentative is late 2024 for applications, but there's also an additional exception based on the scale of the event, which is definitely applicable here, that will allow me to ask for a lot more time if we need it. So we're looking at late next year, we're definitely going to, if it's 75 million, which is what it's looking like, we will have more time to put together projects. So after Irene, I think it was 9 different rounds. We will probably end up somewhere similar. We are much farther ahead based on how long it's been since the disaster than we were during Tropical Storm Irene because we have a much bigger team already. We have a better system in place to jump on these things. So the highest priority, what we started with right after the flood, is property buyouts because people are hurting and they need those to go faster. So we're about to submit the first about $10 million worth of property buyouts to FEMA within the next month or so. That's one set. When we have property buyouts, we're not going to sit on them because we don't want people to wait any longer than they have to. So as soon as we have the application in, if they're FEMA eligible, those will go right to FEMA. For the other projects, which we can do a lot of different things, we can do elevations, we can do flood proofing of commercial or municipal buildings, we can do large floodplain restoration projects where we're removing fill and lowering floodplain elevations in surrounding neighborhoods. We can do infrastructure projects like upsizing bridges and culverts or removing dams. There's a wide variety of things that we can do with that money. And scoping assessments, so I talked about the statewide scoping assessment that we're working on. that'll get us part of the way there, but communities can also apply for their own scoping assessments to look at other specific issues. So scoping can either be an entire community, which is the approach we're taking with our statewide application that I talked about, or we have an undersized bridge and we need engineered designs to upsize it, so it could be structure specific, or looking at a broader area. But the full intent there is using that scoping funding to develop projects to then be able to submit under this grant. So it allows you to put together all the pieces that you need, if it's engineering, a clear scope of work, whatever the budget's going to be for any of those efforts. Does that get at what you were?
Kind of, but I guess also, like, what information are they gonna need to develop a successful application? Like, right, like the repetitive closures, repetitive damage, force hours, materials, and you don't have to go too deep into the weeds, but I mean, like, it's not just like, we have a need, we're gonna get money. Like, what makes for a successful application? And if you could also just remind the folk here about the existence of the local hazard mitigation plans and to use those things, because they've got tools already developed that they can use.
Yes, thank you. And you're required to have an approved local hazard mitigation plan in order to access any of this funding. So it's a good point there. But it's a good place to start in terms of looking at what projects has your community already maybe identified to reduce risk more broadly. And a lot of the things that you're getting to, Chris, I think are data points that we would need in order to develop what's called a benefit cost analysis. So that's one of the requirements for FEMA infrastructure projects. Most buyouts and elevations, we won't have to do that for, but for a lot of those other projects, we will. And it's a very specific FEMA program where you put in numbers and it spits out whether this is cost effective or not. So it might be, depending on the project, it's looking at past damages or looking at a model of a river and assessing what the damage could be, or working with an engineer to do what's called professionally expected damages based on that model. So that's one of the more complicated pieces that you wouldn't need for a different grant that you will need for most of these infrastructure projects. But we do also have support that we can provide to you in developing those benefit cost analyses.
Questions from folks here?
First of all, thank you very much for coming. I'm Debbie Graham, I live in Weston. I must say my head is spinning, and I'm really not sure that it's spinning in any constructive way. I appreciate the fact that you have said you're not going to tell us what to do, but you want to look to us to the vision of what our town wants. And I guess that seems really overwhelming. We have all these various needs, and I guess what I'm saying is, how do we start? Are you saying you want townwide meetings to kind of identify which are the worst things that happened and which are the best things that we want to fix? I guess I really don't even know where to start. And maybe it's just me.
So I would say there's a fundamental question and answer coming into this is, does a community want to try to maintain their existing footprint and try to mitigate in place, or do they have areas where they can expand housing? Do they need to grow? Some communities need more housing. A small number, I think, don't need more housing. So I think that is the fundamental question of where are we living in our community, and do we want to grow? Do we want to try to mitigate in place? I think I won't try to tell communities which direction to go in, but people like Stephanie and John will be able to give you technical advice on, okay, well, mitigating in place, this is what it might look like. And for some locations, it can be that's probably not going to be possible, right? For certain structures, like specific structures, right? It might not be reasonable to mitigate in place. So that's the type of technical advice that that VEM and A&R can give, right, from a rivers and from a hazard mitigation perspective. The community needs assessment is really designed to figure out, okay, well, help to guide and facilitate a process where you figure out, okay, what do you want to do? What do you want to grow? If it's just talking about repairing the damage from this event and repairing it in a way that is upsizing the culvert or making sure the bridge is more resilient, that's going to happen through the existing processes that we set up after Irene, right? Where our culverts that need to be upsized, we're going to recommend that they be upsized, bridges that need to be repaired. I think that's part of the public assistance process. I think the tough question is, when you're looking, if you're looking at buyouts of individuals' homes, where are the homes going to go that replace that housing? That's the tough issue for a lot of communities that are facing buyouts, that are facing locations that may or may not be able to be mitigated.
Homes and businesses.
Homes and businesses, right. Because sometimes a change in use with certain mitigation might allow that to still be productive space for the community for a different type of business. But a home is a home. You can't change the requirements for that too dramatically.
Can I follow up? When you talk about the community, what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for the planning commission to say something? Are you looking for the select board to say something? Are you looking for an ad hoc group of people to say something? Because when there's all these disparate needs, each one is very big, and there's probably not going to be money for everything. So are you saying that the community needs to figure out which are the higher needs? And so again, who is the community?
Especially in a town that doesn't have a mayor or, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback off of that? Because I was just about to say, I don't know if this is on.
Turn the, I didn't go to the
I think
gym
you
this
got
morning.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Nicole Wangard. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Connections. So I was just about to say the same thing. Who is the keeper of this process? So Neighborhood Connections, we're a health and social service agency, nonprofit in Londonderry, and I think, we've been at the center of flood recovery at the individual assistance, center. And I think we've been able to do that because there has been one central body, one location where, we have an active FEMA, individual assistance FEMA staff member at our office 5 days a week. We have 2 social workers that are working with, doing recovery case management every day. So I understand exactly what's who is the keeper of the process, who is driving the boat, who's keeping in regular contact, who is asking those questions on all of the meetings. Every Monday at 10, every Thursday at 4. There will be, someone will have to have ownership. So I think that is a great question. Who holds that ownership? Or who should hold that ownership?
So part of that is the reason we are temporarily creating those interim regional recovery officers. So they should serve as the point of connection on the state side for areas that are interested in hazard mitigation projects. But a key point in all of this process is the local select board. For a buyout, it cannot go forward without the town's approval. For a hazard mitigation project, you're going to really run into that same barrier. So state government has to work through that local government. Community organizations can advocate to our regional recovery officers but we really can't, it's really the gatekeeper is the local select board, the local legislative body. And they don't have to do all the work though, because as long as we can get the green light from the local select board that this town is interested in participating in either a town-specific project or a regional project, then we can try to mobilize technical support and other resources to help guide them and support those conversations and just make sure they're realistic and supported by information. Because I know that we have some information, but we also, are trying to move forward with studies to update our data. We'll have more information soon. I don't know, John, if it's a good time to talk about that or not. But.
Sure. So there's a FEMA map update process underway statewide, but in particular in the West, Black, and Williams watersheds where most of the folks in the room are. I think we'll probably see draft FEMA maps in 2024, which I would strongly encourage the town to look at and review. And then those would be finalized probably in 2025. And those become the regulatory maps. Those are the new floodplain maps that the town's regulating to. So it's a once every 20 or 30-year process, so jump when they're available to review. Please review and provide feedback.
Other questions or comments?
Can I just ask a question to
Yes.
the community? So, we just finished the river survey. How does that fit into the, to that work?
So A&R has just finished the entire state river survey and mapping of things. How does that fit into, haven't we? We're almost finished.
Red Queen.
I'm Marie Levesque-Caduto. I'm the watershed planner for this region with the Department of Environmental Conservation. Work closely with John's Rivers program. What we're doing on the West River, I'll focus on the West. We are just about completing what's called a river geomorphic assessment for the upper river, the West River. So everything from the headwaters in Weston down to the Bull Mountain Dam. There's all the field work for this assessment was done over the last 2 field seasons, and the report is due in the springtime. And what those assessments tell us is where along the river we can do stuff that will help mitigate flood. It's based on river geomorphology, which John can go into better than I can. But where the river is causing problems, where it's being confined, where those structures are that are undersized and need work. Where my program comes in, which is water quality based, we're looking to do projects through the landscape that improve water quality, but also improve how the river functions. And what's been mentioned is floodplain restoration projects. So whenever we have a location where the river should flood the land and water can spread out and slow down and not hit the village so hard, we're looking to find those locations and make that happen so that those areas absorb the flood and they absorb the pressure, they absorb the flow and the velocity to help it. Once it hits the village, it has less power, it has less water. So this report will give us those locations where we can do those kinds of projects. It will also list a myriad of other flood resiliency projects that we might be able to undertake. The key to that is that we need landowners to say yes, right? All of these are going to be on somebody's land. And I'll just give you an example. Post-flood, I live in Reading, and the river waltzed and went through fields and houses, and we have 3 landowners in a row who are willing to provide floodplain. And so we're going to do a 3-parcel, which is really unusual, 3 adjacent parcels to do floodplain restoration, which will hopefully really help mitigate flooding downstream. So as this report comes out, we'll all sit down and review it, and it will be provided to all the towns to be able to say, these are areas that we could focus on and try to help mitigate flooding. There's also, for this region and so Londonderry and Weston are in the West River, Ludlow is on the Black River, and there are, what I do is create basin plans, watershed plans for those. And there are projects in those as well that are identified. And we work really closely with the Regional Planning Commission and with the conservation districts to implement those projects. So they're out there, we have things that we can start doing right away, and we'll have a whole list coming up in the spring as well.
Could you give us a timeline on
On the plan, the new plan that's coming out, it's being done by a company called Fitzgerald Environmental. And their deadline is, I think it's April or May to have that plan completed.
So. Other comments or questions in the back?
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. My name is Jennifer Probst, and I'm the current president of the Weston Volunteer Fire Department.
which is directly across the street. We're having our annual meeting tonight at 7 p.m. You're all welcome to come over. Seriously, come and take a look. We flooded in between about my nose and my eyeballs, as far as that high. Just barely got the apparatus out, thank goodness. And unfortunately, one of our doors was left open, so everything went downstream. The people directly across the street are most likely going to have a FEMA buyout type process. The people next to us are applying for it, and I'm not sure that that one's going to go through. It's actually a commercial business that has been very essential. And we feel like the fire department is kind of essential as well. We're having some issues. We flooded higher than we did for Irene. This is not the first time we flood. We flood on a regular basis, and everybody recognizes we need to move the fire station because it's at the low point, kind of splits the town, but it's at the low point. So the select board has been and we also discovered, because we lost all of our paperwork, we also discovered we don't own the fire station. Apparently the town does right now. So it's been kind of that kind of a year. It's been sort of a hopper. So the select board has been outstanding as far as helping us. We're going through the VLCT and the FEMA application process. But interestingly, we are not a municipality. It's a 501c3 corporation. So what do I do with that? In fact, I didn't apply. I looked through all the rules. I did not apply for the SBA program because there was something in there that said emergency services, etc. We couldn't do that. So, we're okay. We were up and running pretty much functionally through the entire flood, and we were ready, full service 24 hours after the flood. But I need to tell our people something. We don't have a lot of money to go buy land. We're investing, and also land parcels are a little bit tricky, and we don't want to buy any land that's in a flood zone. So where do we access, and do you think that, I'm asking the question not because it's only all about me, but are any of these, but it's all about me and my people and providing services to the community. So do you think that any of these mitigation funds would be available moving forward towards the new firehouse? How do I even start to make that kind of plan? What do we do with that one? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll start, because I think you can go about that. I think if the town owns the building, that's actually helpful. Because, that would automatically be a damaged municipal building, and if it needs to be moved and not repaired or mitigated in place, then we can apply for an alternate project, the town can, right? If there's a contract or lease agreement between you that transfers maintenance and maintenance responsibility to your 501c3, then maybe it ends up going under claim. But one way or the other, the damages related to the building could become an eligible credit towards this alternate project. I would say, if you're a 501c3, you're definitely a critical, FEMA terms a critical nonprofit, right? And I do think we've been working with FEMA PA to make sure, because the SBA gave some confusing guidance, that they're going to evaluate if an application wasn't in time and correct it. But I think you said you're working through it, so your application made it in before the deadline. So that alternate project is only based on the damages to the structure and what it cost to repair in place. We're looking at that situation in places like Johnson's wastewater treatment facility, and it's an involved process of calculating with FEMA what it would cost to repair in place with how often it might get damaged, and they're using older data. I know some of the FEMA leadership is pushing them to update their cost-benefit data to account for climate change trends, but I don't think that has fully permeated their process yet. But I would say there is a chance that some FEMA funding could be applied towards moving to a different location, and Stephanie can correct me if I've stated any of that.
No, I think that's all the same. I think that's right on the public assistance side. From my end, this is one of the questions I get the most from towns that I don't have a good answer for, unfortunately, which is how do we get a new fire station? And we can, if the town doesn't own it, which it sounds like it's not the case here, we can do a buyout, but that's the value of the existing structure, and it's not enough to build a new $5 million fire station. So I don't have a good answer for that. I think USDA Rural Development might have some resources there, but I'm not sure.
If you had the funds, could it be funds and communities fund? That type of project you could do with that or not?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I think, yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, just to be clear, I did not go through the application to the SBA because in the guidelines, it said something about if you're eligible for something or other through emergency response, or there was something in there that
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right.
it said
You
know,
don't have to
stuff.
go through the SBA because of the type of nonprofit that you are.
Yeah, so it said do not apply, because our people said, hey, Jen, look into this. And once I read all the rules, I said, we don't apply, but we're not a municipality.
But Jen, did you do FEMA? Did you apply for FEMA funding though?
As far as damages?
Yeah.
Yeah, we are in the process,
Okay,
yes.
yeah. And can I just clarify for some other organizations that might be here that maybe didn't know about the FEMA Public Assistance Program? Am I hearing correctly that that in some cases it's not too late to start that process even though the deadline has, I think, passed? Maybe you could comment on it?
Yes, October 12th was the deadline for FEMA public assistance. However, because there was some confusion out there, they are evaluating late requests for public assistance. You can either, go directly to FEMA's page to apply, or if you have questions about how to get there, what to do, the admin.2023floods@vermont.gov email. Any potential public assistance applicant can send any question they want to that email. It's a state email address, and we'll field it. We'll point you in the right direction. So that's intended to be anything related to FEMA public assistance will help either answer your question, provide you direct support, or point you directly to where you can apply. We have a packet for how to apply for FEMA public assistance that they send out when they get that particular question. And we have nonprofit specific guidance that we put together as well.
Can you just give us that email one more time, please?
It's adm.2023floods, FLOODS, @Vermont, the full word, vermont.gov.
Will?
Thank you, Doug.
Sorry, I didn't turn off for you.
Thanks, Doug, John, Stephanie, Wayne. Will Freeman, New Thought, Vermont in Weston. When COVID came, the legislature made some determinations. But when it went to ACCD, there was a slip between the cup and the lip. And as we approach the new legislative session, I want to make sure that whatever the legislature decides and whatever the government entities do, that there's a real clear connection, because there was, for those of us here on the ground, it was very confusing, because the legislature decided one thing and what ACC did was something different. That's the Agency of Community Development. Right. So I'm just doing this as a preamble to hope that there's a real close connection between what the legislature decides and how that gets articulated and to the ground. I appreciate the numbers, but I was a little glazed over by all the numbers, and I'm here on the ground. We were affected by the flood at New Thought, Vermont, as well as many others here, and I think I want to hear more about on the ground from those of you too here, and we welcome you. I'd like to hear from the folks from Londonderry and from Ludlow and for those effects, because this is on the ground, and I think, yesterday somebody asked me to convey something to you all. He said, I've worked with state officials and I'm not willing to come, I'm not willing to waste my time because I don't feel supported. And he asked me to convey that. And this is something that we've also heard another time was, if you're close to Montpelier or Burlington, you get the service. But the further away from Montpelier, the less services are available. And that's why I appreciate you all being here with us, And it's really true. I mean, Route 4 South, we have to really do more advocacy, and we're really grateful to have such a great legislative team to support us. So that's my comment.
So I'll just quickly respond before we go ahead more questions. So I appreciate what you're saying and the perspective of those folks who actually pass that along. I can tell you that I worked with many of the folks in the room, both town officials and property owners. I live locally. My role within the agency is to be that I'm the local technical assistance for floodplain development. So Will, I saw Will walk in, he didn't leave. The zoning administrator in both Weston and Londonderry, Jared in the front row, the zoning administrator in the town of Ludlow. You know, I work with them, Jared, somewhat on a daily basis these days. I think he would like to talk to me less. But that's my role. My role is to be that technical assistance, that like boots on the ground in southern Vermont. So whether it's technical assistance to the towns or to individual property owners who have questions, can you come to my house and tell me what might be the best thing to do? That's a role that I can fill, and I'm happy to do so.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also ask that if you could send me the example where ACCD's interpretation differed from the legislature's privately, I'd love to dig into that, because I oversaw the Coronavirus Relief Fund portfolio, and I didn't get reports of a deviation from legislative intent on any ACCD programs, and I'd definitely be happy to look into that and try to figure out what went wrong there, because one of my main charges was making the federal rules reconcile with the state law and achieving legislative intent as much as possible. So I would definitely love to try to dig into that if you have the specific example. I would say we've gotten feedback in other parts of the state that people don't feel like the state was by their side. The governor wants us to achieve that as much as possible. But I would say our emergency management model goes through the municipalities. A lot of our regional coordinators were calling and connecting with the local emergency management directors every single day. But the local communities aren't going to see that, the people within the town. But we can always improve on our communication, and we do want people to feel like we're there for them. So I think it is, it's troubling to hear that, but it isn't the first time either. And as far as the differing levels of support, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I did an analysis on our ARPA funds, which I think the legislature and the governor did a great job of arriving at a portfolio of investment of $1 billion that made a lot of sense. It's really good for Vermont. When we looked at where those projects were happening, they were just happening in the same places that they've always happened because of the nature of our existing programs. So that's one reason we tried to augment municipal technical assistance, but I think there are larger conversations about how our programs are built at the state level, what our complexity incentivizes in the relationship between the state and local governments and communities. Some of our programs are well-meaning and every criteria makes sense, but when taken as a collective, it makes it nearly impossible for a smaller community to participate in a program.
Absolutely, and there are different layers. As Deb pointed out, we don't have those administrative structures in some of our small towns. So it really is like, okay, well, you've got to do this and this and this and this and this and this. And small nonprofits that are run by volunteers just don't have that capacity, whereas the larger ones, they press a button, they have the staff, they can dedicate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really different experience down here.
Yeah.
Let me add on that a little story. After the flood, within, I guess, 5 or 6 days, a group of us got together, nonprofit organization leaders for the most part, some business folks, and we met and we said we need to get organized so we can understand what it will take to recover, rebuild, be resilient, etc., particularly in our village, which has huge historic nature to it. Ben Doyle was very helpful. He brought together a group of nonprofit folks from the state and some state folks from VLCT, etc., sometime in August. And they toured the downtown area, the village, I would call it, and saw the damage, which was extraordinarily extensive in Weston. and in Ludlow for that matter, and Londonderry. But my point here is that they toured. We got together the number of people who were in the working group, met with Ben Doyle and these folks from the agencies. And Ben said, you know, this is no job for volunteers. You guys are not going to be able to deal with these issues and successfully remediate the issues, get buildings fixed, get the road done, get stuff that has to be done. We can't get a new fire department, we can't fix what we need to fix without professional help. So since August of 2023 to today, we have been seeking that professional help. Doug and I are the co-chairs of this working group. We have shopped ourselves around to the Regional Planning Commission, to BDCC, to BLCT, to any number of places. And we get the answer that says, yeah, we understand that you do need a professional help. We have a specific idea, which is to have somebody who would work with us in Weston for 6 hours a week at $75 an hour for 50 weeks. That's about a $20,000 number. That's the size of the grant number we're looking for. And we've stumbled around this state and found no help whatsoever. But you just told me in the opening remarks is there's no room for amateurs. There's no room at all for volunteers. We need to use the select board as our mechanism. And we have a select board member here, Tim Goodwin, who will tell you that the capacity of the select board in this town, 5 highly energized, highly busy volunteers who meet a couple of times a month. And that's it. They don't have time to go out and do professional work during the day. And we don't have a town administrator. So I mean, the capacity at the local level is non-existent unless you go to volunteers. And even the volunteers have the energy to pull together the town, pull together the responses. The Planning Commission did a terrific survey and has been doing some meetings about what's the future of this town look like, what do people want. That's not the kind of it doesn't seem to fit in the pattern anywhere, because that's a volunteer organization that with the zoning administrator is doing things. But these are, this is what a real 620-person town does.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I grew up in Marshall.
So I know you guys, I was a Fed once, and I didn't retire for that, I just left. But the point I would make to you is, you are professionals, you deal with big numbers, you deal at the policy level. I've been in the state government enough with heading commissions for various governors that I know that the agency heads have a string attached to their left foot that goes straight to the legislature, and there's often a day when they can't get anything done because I got to be in front of the Commerce Committee, or I got to get into the natural resources, because they've called me to find out what the hell's going on. So there's a humongous gap in the state, not only between Montpelier and South of Route 4. There's a gap between the state, the policymakers, the people on the ground, like the tiny towns, and there's this gap in the middle. And I don't know what the hell to do about it, except to say that volunteers are critical to solving these issues. And a 5-year timeline is irrelevant, meaningless, when you've got the playhouse that has to be rebuilt so it can open again. I mean, it's crazy to talk about we have $40 million for buyout for 100 properties in 252 towns. Not all of whom are affected, but we've got 2 in Ludlow, 2 right here. That's 4% in 2 towns. I will admit, that's my wife, God bless her. When she said her eyes glaze over, so do mine. It just is a blur of numbers. and terribly frustrating. That's my speech, I'm sorry.
Wayne, Londonderry does have a very good consultant. I don't know if
I couldn't hear you.
Londonderry does have a very good consultant who used to work at FEMA, and he's been helping them with all, Londonderry with all the paperwork.
Well, we're still looking for one for here.
Can you give us his number, Will? And I think Tom from Londonderry had a.
Yeah, I had a few comments first. I'm glad you guys are looking at regional approach. I've been advocating for that for everyone I've ever talked to in the state since the flooding happened. Second, if you want to know what a volunteer select board member does, I have over 200 hours, at least, into this flood. That's a lot. But my specific question is, we have a bridge in Londonderry called the Ridge Bridge. This bridge was gone in '98. And it was a temporary bridge that fixed it, because it's the only way to the community. There's one way in. We have to negotiate with the property owner to open up a trail anytime this bridge is out of commission. So, in Irene, it wasn't fully taken out this time, or in this one, it wasn't fully taken out. Both entrance and exit were completely gone. The bridge remained as a temporary bridge that we've been trying to get state help for 12 years. And so we had to fix it just to get it open so people had it way in and out. And now the state says, you fixed it, it's done. But the state even says this bridge needs to be a 68-foot span. It's 44 feet now. The abutments are in the river. And you're telling us it's fixed. And FEMA is trying everything they can to help us get a new bridge here. And we're just having a hard time. Even though our FEMA guy can't get a straight answer from the state on what codes and standards is. Every state agency contradicts themselves, says A&R is in charge, V-Trans is in charge.
If we can chat after, I'll get your name and number, I can connect you with the river management engineer. I don't know the bridge in question. I'm sure Scott Jensen is aware of it, but Scott and I can have a conversation about it, and we can circle back and try to figure out what's going on.
We've had a statewide conference call about this bridge with everyone, and everyone contradicts everyone else. It's ridiculous. V-Trans says A&R is in charge. A&R says V-Trans is in charge. Someone else says someone else is in charge. We can't even get an answer on what codes and standards are in this state. Because everything says recommendation, or has a disclaimer saying maybe it needs more study.
I do think I actually remember being briefed on how miserable that call you're talking about was for you. So I do want to acknowledge that, we did get a report that the call was very frustrating, that people were actively contradicting each other. I had thought that we had chased that down and gotten a firm answer that reconciled the various agency answers in that call afterwards. But from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like it. So I can follow up on that as well, because I know I have an email chain where a representative reported that unpleasant experience for you. So we can dig into that. I think overall, we've had a lot of good, productive conversations about what needs to happen for a particular bridge to get repaired, upgraded, etc. after this event. But that one was definitely reported, and I acknowledge that that conversation did not go the way it should have gone. And that if people disagreed with each other at the state level, they should have taken that offline, and they should have asked for your forgiveness that they needed to look up something instead of trying to give you an answer that wasn't accurate.
It's 5:30, and I'll take one more comment or question.
Doug, I would like you to respond to Wayne's, rant.
So I kind of interjected there a little bit that I grew up in Marshfield, right on the edge of Peacham. So I grew up in a smaller community. Yes, it's relatively close to Montpelier, but culturally it's worlds away from Montpelier. One of the reasons I proposed the Municipal Technical Assistance Program Was that this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was December, I thought.
Earlier this year, time has been kind of warm for me lately, sorry, is that I do see the gap that you're talking about. I do agree it's there. It is much larger than anything a governor should be able to address on his own. It's definitely much larger than anything I can address on my own. I've been making recommendations. I know the governor sees it. I know he'll make recommendations, but it really takes a very large conversation with the General Assembly to think about how we're structured in Vermont and where those communication gaps are, because they are persistent and they are all across the state. Once you get outside of I mean, there are different experiences for different towns, yes. But I do think there are enough areas that aren't well connected. And I also think it wouldn't make sense for a town of Weston's size to maintain the resources on hand to deal with a lot of these issues. It just wouldn't make financial sense. So
I mean, one group we haven't talked about is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I
Yeah.
mean, they are a critically important player here, and coupled with our regional planners, we ought to be able to provide the resources you need to dig out and to help partner with grants and with a lot of other. I mean, I think VLCT has to be at the table here. I mean, they service you. You pay them to help you, and VLCT needs to be much more active in this arena, in my opinion.
It's an interesting point. It's a well-taken point. VLCT was here during the summer, viewing the damage, et cetera.
Wayne, can I say one thing just related to that? I agree exactly with what Doug was saying. And I've been actually talking to UVM through the partnership, Institute for Rural Partnerships, about we really need to look at the structure of governance in Vermont in 2023. And does the model that was set up in the 1700s make sense now? And just have an objective conversation about how we do what we do, and is it sustainable or not? And how do we, and by sustainable, I mean like people's lives sustainable, like, you know, everything that Tom and his counterparts in both Londonderry, Weston, and Ludlow, you know, what it takes to do the work that's required to do the work of towns, to do the work of the regions, to do the work of the state. There's a whole other conversation about like what regional commissions are empowered to do, and frankly what we're limited to do through these performance-based grants. We have so many strings tied to us defining exactly what we do and how we engage with towns, when it frankly would be better if we could just say, engage with towns the way you need to engage with towns and the way the towns want you to engage with them on their, and work at their speed and at their timetable. But that's not the reality right now. That's another conversation. But I kind of want to just bring up a positive note in all this. You know, the fact that the river corridor plan is in the works and will be done in April and May, and that Tom has already been, and West have already been talking to Weston and Londonderry have already been talking to each other about when that comes out, we need to look at common solutions and also looking down to Jamaica too. That's great news that the towns are talking to each other. I know the two select boards, Londonderry and Jamaica, or Londonderry and Weston, are talking to each other. At my level, I haven't brought this to the towns yet, but I'll give you a preview and you can tell me how it feels at some point. But I want to have a housing conversation among at least 4 towns, if they're up for it. I haven't brought it to them yet because I kind of want to define what it looks like as opposed to just pitching the idea cold. But like have Weston, Londonderry, Jamaica, and Windhall have a conversation about where is the best place for housing. Because trying to have these conversations in these tiny geographies and leaving housing up to the decision of each of these individual tiny towns and these overstressed select boards. So hopefully I'm going to bring a proposal to the towns and see, hey, is this something you want to engage in so that maybe we can move things forward? But maybe not everybody has the larger wastewater system to support, you know, literally probably over 1,000 units of housing that's needed just for these 4 towns. Where does it go? Where can we successfully do infill development? How do you grow away from the floodplains? Where is the appropriate land? So hopefully that may be a process the towns will want to engage in, and I'll bring that proposal to you guys in the new year. But I think there's some good news just in that relative to Irene, things are moving faster. Individual assistance, that is rolling out. That really didn't get underway after Irene until January. It's happening now. I mean, Doug's been working with getting the caseworkers out. Nikki, if she's still here, has been working on that. So I think there's some good things, but the frustration y'all are feeling is absolutely real. And, you know, every town has come to us wanting that. You know, Jeff has come to us, I don't know how many times, saying, can you give us that person for 9 hours a week for this long a period? And it's like, I'm afraid I can't, but we absolutely recognize that that's what you need. And is there a way that we can find the funding to do that? We're going to need to do that across a lot of different subjects. So didn't mean to, but I just wanted to say that there are some positive things going on here, and I'm really encouraged that the towns and you guys convene us are wanting to talk to each other, because that's huge. We just had a meeting of select boards in the Wyndham region, hosted cooperatively with the LCT, and I live in Townsend, used to live in Newthane. It's amazing how much the towns just that close to each other and never talk to each other. So if we can just even get the towns talking to each other and potentially working together, it's going to be awesome.
Thank you, Chris, and I ranted, and I apologize if I hesitated.
I've had worse. I worked at the tax department.
Well, you were in the Army, so I mean, you know that. So, but thank you all for coming down, seriously. It's not easy for you guys to get free of the circle around Montpelier and get down here, and we really appreciate it, we really do. Thank you.
I know we're over, so a really quick thought. I would echo Chris's gratitude that you all are having this conversation, wanting to come together. That's really heartening to me. Some of our communities aren't having that same drive, and I do think that will put you ahead. We will figure out how to get you the resources to support the conversation.
Okay, I think that wraps it up, and there is, Will, tell me what's going on in the lobby.
In the lobby is cheese and snacks and drinks, and you're welcome, and the conversation will continue. Thank you.